Throughout history, the world's greatest empires have fallen. Not by invasion, not by rebellion, but by their own hand. Their armies were unmatched, their wealth seemed infinite, their influence stretched across continents and oceans.
And yet, every one of them crumbled because their money did. Rome. Spain.
Britain, each ruled the known world. Each believed they were different, chosen, eternal, exceptional, and each followed the same invisible pattern toward ruin. Overspending. Debasement. Inflation. Collapse. It is a cycle as old as civilization itself, and every sign says the modern world is walking that path again. This is the story of how empires end. Not with conquest, but with the slow death of trust. The birth of power. Rome. At the height of its glory, the Roman Empire was the most advanced civilization on earth. From the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Britain, Rome ruled 60 million souls. Its armies were feared, its engineers unrivaled, its cities gleaming with marble and gold. And at the heart of that empire was a coin, the denarius. First struck in 211 BC, the denarius was more than currency. It was credibility cast in silver. Each coin contained about 4.5 grams of pure metal. When a merchant accepted one, he knew exactly what it was worth. No tricks, no lies. For centuries, that trust built an empire. It paid the soldiers, paved the roads, and funded the conquest of the world. But expansion has a price. Every new border demanded soldiers, every province demanded governors, every road demanded upkeep. Rome's wealth was vast, but its ambitions were larger. And when its treasury ran dry, its rulers reached for the same tool every empire eventually does. They tampered with the money. The first crack, in 54 AD, Emperor Nero needed funds. He built palaces, financed wars, and promised prosperity he could not afford. So he ordered the mints to change the mix. Less silver, more base metal. The coins looked the same. They bore the same emperor's face, but their value had changed forever. At first, the difference seemed small, a 10% reduction in purity. But every emperor after him discovered the same secret. Debasing the currency was easy and addictive. By the reign of Caracalla, 2 centuries later, the denarius was half silver. By 265 AD, under Gallienus, it contained barely 5%. A coin that once gleamed with silver was now a dull piece of metal coated in deceit. To the people, it was still money. But money is not paper or metal, it is trust. And when trust breaks, the empire follows. Third, the unraveling inflation gripped the empire. What had cost a single coin now cost 50. Farmers refused to sell grain for debased silver. Soldiers demanded payment in gold or goods. Even the tax collectors and the enforcers of empire could no longer collect. Trade collapsed, markets froze. The government resorted to decrees and threats, but the money was dead. Rome's fall was not a thunderclap, it was a long, grinding decay. By the time the barbarians reached the gates, the empire was already hollow. Its armies unpaid, its people starving, its faith in itself gone. The legions didn't lose the empire, and the mint did. The silver flood, Spain. 1,000 years later, another empire rose on Rome's ashes. Born not from conquest of Europe, but from conquest of the world, Spain. The 16th century was Spain's golden age. The New World had been discovered. Cortés had claimed the Aztec Empire. Pizarro had crushed the Incas. And in the mountains of South America, miners struck what seemed like eternal wealth. The mountain of Potosi. It was the richest silver deposit ever found. For more than a century, galleons carried its treasure across the Atlantic, pouring rivers of silver into Spanish ports. Spain became the richest nation on earth, and for a time, the most powerful. Its currency, the Spanish dollar, pure silver, became the first truly global coin, circulating from London to Beijing, from the Caribbean to the Mediterranean. The world trusted Spain's silver just as it had once trusted Rome's denarius. But once again, trust would become the empire's undoing. The curse of too much wealth. There is a cruel paradox in economics. When everyone suddenly has more money, no one is richer. Prices simply rise. Spain had discovered more silver than any empire before it. But by flooding Europe with that silver, it destroyed its own value. Throughout the 1500s, prices soared tenfold. The cost of food, clothing, and labor exploded. The silver coins hadn't changed. The world around them had. Spain believed itself blessed by God. In truth, it was cursed by arithmetic. The empire used its silver not to build industries or invest in progress, but to fund wars, palaces, and endless luxury imports. Silver came in from the colonies and flowed straight back out to pay for goods Spain no longer produced. The empire used its silver not to build industries or invest in progress, but to fund wars, palaces, and endless luxury imports. Silver came in from the colonies and flowed straight back out to pay for goods Spain no longer produced. Factories in France, the Netherlands, and England thrived on Spanish demand. Spain itself built nothing, and soon the richest nation in the world was hopelessly in debt. By the king's default. By the late 1500s, King Philip II faced a problem that seemed impossible. His empire stretched across continents, his galleons still arrived heavy with silver, and yet his treasury was empty. He had borrowed against the future, and the future had arrived. In 1557, Philip declared bankruptcy. It was the first sovereign default in modern history.
But it would not be the last.
Spain defaulted again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596, 4 times in 40 years. Every default shattered the illusion of strength.
Lenders demanded higher interest. Credit evaporated.
And when the government ran out of lenders, it turned to deception. Copper coins were minted and passed off as silver. Inflation soared again. The empire's money, once the envy of the world, became worthless. By 1700, Spain's empire was a shadow of its former self. The nation that had possessed half the world's silver could not pay its soldiers or feed its people. It had drowned in its own wealth. 2 empires down, 2 patterns the same. First comes expansion, then overreach, then the desperate act, the manipulation of money to cover what power can no longer sustain. Every empire finds this point, and every empire believes it can cheat the math. Part 2, the Empire of Debt, 7th. The Iron Pound, Britain's Age of Supremacy. When Spain's star dimmed, another empire rose from the fog and fire of an island nation. Britain. Through ships, trade, and steel, Britain mastered the world's oceans. It built railways across continents, wired the planet with telegraph lines, and claimed an empire so vast that the sun was said never to set upon it. By the mid-1800s, the British Empire ruled 1 in every 4 people on Earth. And its currency, the pound sterling, became the anchor of global finance. For over 2 centuries, the pound was tied to gold. It was more than paper, it was a promise. If you held a pound, you held a claim to a fixed weight of gold. Real value, not political illusion. Nations traded in pounds, ships insured their cargo in pounds. The world trusted the pound as it once trusted Rome's denarius and Spain's silver. But trust, once again, was the seed of danger. Because power invites overreach, and the British Empire, like all before it, believed its wealth had no limits. 8. The price of war. In 1914, Britain faced the first great war of the modern age. To fight it, it needed money that's more than gold reserves could ever provide. And so, for the first time in 2 centuries, the government suspended gold convertibility. It printed paper pounds to fund the war effort. By the war's end, Britain had won, but at a staggering cost. Its debt had risen tenfold in 5 years, its industries were exhausted, and the pound, once as good as gold, had been reduced to ink and promise. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, made a fateful decision. He returned Britain to the gold standard, pegging the pound at its pre-war rate. It was an act of pride and a catastrophe. The economy could not support the illusion of strength. Exports collapsed, unemployment surged, and to defend the pound's value, interest rates were kept brutally high. By 1931, the illusion shattered. Britain abandoned gold forever. The pound was devalued, and the world began to look elsewhere for stability. But Britain had not yet learned the lesson. It would take another even greater war to finish what the first had begun. The fall of the pound. World War II broke Britain's economy completely. Cities burned, industries vanished. The empire's debt soared beyond imagination. By 1945, Britain's national debt exceeded 270% of its entire economic output. Victory had come at the price of insolvency. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, as the war still raged, the global financial order was rewritten, and Britain was no longer at the head of the table. The United States, with its vast untouched industries and overflowing gold reserves, took the mantle of global reserve currency. The US dollar replaced the pound. Britain was now an empire in name only. In the years that followed, it tried desperately to hold on. The pound was repeatedly devalued, or in 1949, in 1967, each time erasing savings, crushing confidence, and signaling decline. Inflation soared to 25% by the 1970s. The empire that had once ruled the seas now begged the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. And as the pound fell, so did the colonies, India, Egypt, Kenya. Hong Kong, one by one, the pieces broke away until only the memory of empire remained. Britain's downfall came not from invasion, but from insolvency. It had borrowed and printed its way out of greatness. The empire that had conquered the world had been conquered by debt. The new empire, America. In 1945, as Britain faded, a new empire rose from the ashes, one that spanned not just continents but ideas. The United States of America. It emerged from World War II stronger than any nation in history. Its cities were intact, its factories humming, its gold reserves unmatched. At Bretton Woods, the world agreed the US dollar would be the foundation of the new financial order. Every other currency would tie itself to the dollar, and the dollar would be tied to gold, $35 an ounce. It was a system built on confidence, and confidence at first was easy to maintain. For decades, the US enjoyed an economic miracle. Its middle class grew, its industries thrived, and its currency was the symbol of global trust. But like every empire before it, success planted the seeds of excess. The temptation of unlimited power wars are expensive. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War. Add to that the rise of vast domestic programs, social spending, infrastructure, welfare. By the 1960s, the US was spending far more than it earned, and foreign governments began to notice that America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France's Charles de Gaulle called the bluff. He sent ships to the US Treasury demanding gold in exchange for paper dollars. Others followed. The vaults of Fort Knox began to empty, and in 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that changed the world. He closed the gold window. From that day forward, the dollar would no longer be backed by anything but faith. Faith in the US government, faith in its power, faith in its promise. The dollar became a fiat currency, a symbol of trust, not substance. At first, nothing seemed to break. The economy continued to grow, inflation seemed manageable, and the dollar's dominance held. But the invisible line had been crossed. The empire had entered the same cycle as those before it. The age of the printing press. In 1980, the US national debt stood at $900 billion. By 2000, it had reached $5.6 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. Today, in 2025, it exceeds $36 trillion and rising faster than ever. Like Rome debasing its silver or Britain abandoning gold, America found a new way to expand its money supply: quantitative easing. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing, buying bonds, rescuing banks, and fueling a market addicted to artificial money. When the pandemic struck, another $4 trillion was created in 2 years, more than in the entire previous century combined. Economists called it necessary. Officials called it temporary. History calls it predictable. Inflation followed, prices soared, and the government reassured its citizens just as Nero, Philip II, and Churchill once did. This time is different, but it never is. 3. The erosion of trust. For generations, the world accepted the dollar as the ultimate safe haven, the currency of oil, trade, and reserve holdings. But trust is fading. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, less than 60%. Nations are diversifying, trading in local currencies, building new systems, buying gold, preparing for the post-dollar world. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members, are working to break their dependence on the dollar altogether. Meanwhile, the US maintains nearly 800 military bases in over 70 countries, a global presence funded not by surpluses, but by debt. The same forces that once defined Rome, Spain, and Britain are converging again. Overextension, overspending, and the quiet debasement of money. The pattern unfolds. Look closely, and the pattern reveals itself. Every empire that ruled the world followed the same 7 steps. 1. Dominance, military strength, economic power, a trusted currency. 2. Overextension, expanding beyond means, promising too much to too many. 3. Deficit spending, borrowing to sustain the illusion of prosperity. 4. Currency debasement, altering the money to cover the debt. 5. Inflation, the hidden tax that erodes wealth and trust. 6. Loss of confidence, when citizens and nations no longer believe in the money. 7. Collapse, the empire falls from within. Rome reduced its silver, Spain drowned in its own treasure. Britain printed itself into decline, and now America prints more money in a decade than in all of history before it. Every empire believes it can rewrite the laws of economics. None ever have. The final stage. So where are we now? If history is our guide, the United States stands at stage 5 inflation, creeping toward loss of confidence. The trust that holds the dollar on pay and by extension the modern world together is beginning to fray. When that trust breaks, it will not be a single event. It will be a process, slow, invisible, and then sudden. History offers 3 endings. 1. A controlled decline like Britain's, slow, painful, but survivable. 2. A chaotic collapse like Rome's, total breakdown of trust and order. 3. A reset where a new system rises from the ashes, perhaps digital, perhaps gold-backed, perhaps something yet unseen. Which one we face depends not on fate, but on choices made now. The unforgiving law empires do not die because they are conquered. They die because they believe the rules no longer apply to them. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print wealth into existence. You cannot debase a currency and expect it to remain trusted. The pattern is absolute, mathematical, historical, inevitable. It does not care about patriotism, technology, or power. It only cares about truth, that when money dies, empires follow. The echo of history. Rome's silver turned to dust. Spain's treasure became its curse. Britain's pound lost its crown. And now the dollar, the modern denarius, trembles beneath the same weight. The faces change, the centuries pass, but the pattern remains. When the reckoning comes, it will not be sudden. It will be silent. The slow evaporation of faith in the world's greatest promise. Because every empire ends the same way. Not in the moment it falls, but in the moment it convinces itself it never could. If this gave you a new way to see history, remember this. The lessons of the past are not warnings. They are blueprints, and the pattern never lies.